Hi everyone, Kate and Fiona Pearman joining you for this week's Facebook Live where we're talking about imposter syndrome. I think this is language that is used frequently by men and women, particularly in our world. Our proximity is to women who talk about this. And I think this is a really interesting one as distinct to the piece around inner critic and self-doubt fee, because imposter syndrome, and whether it's true or not true, and there's a whole lot of stuff, right, that sits around, it's a made up word, but women we know will talk about this. They will use this. I'm worried about being an imposter. And I think what's distinct about this one is we're worried about being found out, that other people will see me and judge me as someone who was out of integrity with what they said they were going to do, and a fraud.
When we dug into this, we really found that actually this terminology, imposter syndrome, is very shaming language. It immediately goes to pretense, to being a pretender, to that I don't deserve to be here, that I'm going to be found out, that I'm not going to be enough. It really orients us to being disempowered and feeling as though we can't do what we probably are capable of. In fact, people gave us the gig, or we won the role, or we're in that, leading that project, or we're doing whatever it is because someone else knew that we could do it. But when we get there, all of this stuff starts going on, and it does feel really quite scary, because the thing about being found out is, that would mean all sorts of potentially catastrophic things if I was found out to not be able to do it.
I think the interesting piece around, as individuals, how we assess our own capability is our observations, the feedback we're getting about how well performing what we're doing is a function of what we're doing externally. So what we say, what we do, often the feedback we're receiving from our stakeholders, but equally what's going on internally. And so often it's the inner critic, it's the self-doubt, discounting our skill, capability, experience, telling us you got something wrong, often catastrophizing those things that do go wrong. That mean collectively, when we take our observation of what we're doing externally and maybe the feedback we're getting externally, and our observation of what's going on in our inner world, that inner critic, means that we're discounting how we're showing up and probably whether we have what it takes in order to be successful. I think what's distinct for those that are outside, right, who external to us, who aren't privy to the inner critic, aren't privy to our inner world, who are just observing what we do, what we say, the outcomes we're achieving, the value bringing, the problems we're solving, they're judging us by the information they have, which often is going to be far higher, right, than perhaps what's going on for us when we bring all of our data points together.
Yeah, and I think this is a really important one to start to understand about yourself, is you are going to make decisions based on what you know in the world, and you are going to draw on all of the pieces of intel that you have. And when some of that is actually not correct, and it is the inner critic, as we've talked about, trying to keep you safe, trying to stop you from making a mistake, trying to stop you from getting into a dangerous situation, it's actually false intel. The inner critic is running on an old story, an old dynamic, and it's trying to do something that's actually no longer relevant, but it feels really relevant to you and it feels really important, which is why we get hooked into it and why we end up with this sort of disconnect between someone else thinking I can do it and why, my inner voice is telling me that I can't. And so that's where the pretense feels like, oh my God, but, can I actually do it? Can I achieve what this other person or this organization is saying I'm capable of? So I think the really important opportunity here is to start to examine and understand the reality of the inner critic, to start to see what its past purpose was and where we are today, and start to redefine what it is that's actually going on, because it's quite likely it's caught in an old story.
Yeah, and I think the critical piece here is why it's so important is you could get tons and tons of external feedback, tons of validation, tons of evidence around the achievements, the value you're bringing. And if this inner critic is still live and loud in your head, it is going to be discounting your skill, capability, experience. It is going to be telling you and keeping this imposter perspective alive. And so that's why it's so critical, right? Because if we can quieten that down, we can right size it, all of a sudden we're able to, as individuals, have a far more balanced perspective of how I'm showing up in the outer world, balanced with what's going on in my inner world. We're going to leave it there. If you enjoyed today's confidence conversation, we'd love to hear your comments, your feedback below. Of course, the big thing we do in our Acts of Confidence program is really take a light and shine it on a lot of the relationships with inner critic, fear, beliefs, default behaviors, assumptions that perhaps have been driving the show, and help you right-size those and reframe them so you can take those small acts of confidence, get that evidence to show up differently in the world. And when you're ready to join that program, of course, we'd love to talk to you. You can find out more on our website, www.coreconfidence.com.au.